Hi there, I'm Sam Moser, and I'm currently converting this Ford Transit into a camper van. If you want to have a van layout with a bed that goes widthways or sideways across the back here, then you need to figure out how to squeeze out as many extra inches as you can from each of these rear wall bays. In this video, I'm going to show you how and why I built my rear wall panels like this, and we'll measure just how much width that gets me back here at the height of the bed. And then we'll see how this compares to doing something like adding flares to extend these outer walls in your van. Let's go. So why build bumped out areas in the walls like this? Well, when you're designing in a small space like this, you got to do whatever you can to maximize the functional space in the van. One thing that can really help you get more usable space in your layout is to design a bed that's situated sideways rather than long ways. The problem with that is if you orient the bed sideways, then you're constrained on how long the bed can be by how wide the walls of the van are. At that point, you're left with basically three options. You can build a wall that's flat all the way across and just deal with it being a narrower space. Or the next option is you can try to claim as much usable space as you can within the standard walls of the van. So you can build a bump out in the wall like this, where the wall panel is deeper wherever there's a kind of bay area in the wall, and get a few extra inches on this side, a few extra inches on that side. Or the third option is you can install what they call flares. And flares are an extension you put on the outside of the van. You basically cut out the metal as if you were installing a window and glue on this fiberglass capsule that gets you another extra couple inches to each side that you can push the bed out into. We'll talk more about the pros and cons of flares in a second, but first, let's see how everything measures up right now as it is, and then we'll compare everything. First, let's measure the wall at the outer flat part to get a baseline. So if we measure down here, and we're excluding the bump out, I'll go just under it, we're at almost 67 inches. It's about 66 3/4 right there. Now, if you're doing a raised bed across the back, a more common height to put that out is about 36 inches. And so if I take that measurement at my mark at 36 inches, then I'm down to just under 66 inches. So 66 inches is 5 foot 6 inches. That's not going to be wide enough for most people to sleep comfortably in. For the rest of my measurements, I'm just going to measure up at this 36-inch kind of mid-height level in the van. Now let's measure from the back of these wall bump outs. So if we start at the back of this one and go all the way across, I'm at just over 72 inches, about 72 1/4. So that's basically right at 6 foot. So right there, that's an extra 3 inches on each side, brings us to that 6 foot. And 6 foot is already a much better width to go with. But the thing is, in the Transit, you could actually go even wider than that and still be within the standard wall. And let me show you what I mean. I need to go ahead and take off this back panel in my bump out. So with this back panel removed, we can see a couple things. The first is that I left extra room behind this for insulation, even down at this bottom part. The second thing is that I brought this down lower than just where the window bay is. So the actual window bay starts about right here, and if you were to limit the bump out to start about here, you could go a little bit deeper. I brought it all the way down here just before where the metal bumps out, and that's because on this side there's going to be a lower sort of bunk bed, and this is going to give just a little more elbow room for that lower bed. Let's measure how much deeper this could go if this insulation basically wasn't here, or I'm just going to compress it all the way to measure it. If we measure at this end, I can get, there's over an inch of play right here. So let's say an inch on this back side, and then on this front side, there's even more. It's over 2 inches. So let's say 2 inches at this front side. So if we say you could potentially bump this out an extra 1 inch at the back, 2 inches at the front, then you'd really be in the range of 74 to 76 inches wide. Now, if you were to cut out this area and add flares, you would get another couple inches on either side. I don't have a set of flares I can measure, but on their website, they advertise that you can make a bed that's about 80 inches wide. So basically, it sounds like you'd be getting an extra 2 to 3 inches on each side. All right, so how do all those options compare? Well, I think if you're not super tall, that most people can build a sideways bed that's going to be pretty comfortable for them, just working within the standard walls of the van. So the most space you can squeeze that to is going to be about 6 foot 2 inches, or if you leave room for insulation and build them like I did, then it's around 6 foot wide. If you are taller than that and want to sleep sideways, then you need to look at installing flares. Flares are great for getting that extra couple inches, but they're expensive. There are two main manufacturers that make flares, Flare Space flares and Van Speed capsules. Both are pretty similar in how they work and get you a similar amount of space. They cost around $2,000 for a set, and it's actually a little more than that because they come unpainted and you have to take them to typically an auto shop to get them painted to match the exterior of your van. So not cheap, but I've been seeing them on more and more vans, so I think a lot of people think they're worth it. For me, I think building the walls like this is a really good middle ground where you can still get a decently wide bed, but you're not having to go through the extra expense and work of installing those flares. Hey, real quick, I want to pop in with a quick ad break. Not for a sponsor, but for a service of my own, consulting. If you're working on your own DIY camper van build and could use a second set of eyes, I offer one-on-one consulting calls. Whether you want feedback on your layout, help troubleshooting part of the build, or just want to pick my brain about tools, materials, or the whole process, I'm here for it. I've been through the ups and downs of building vans, and I want to help you avoid some of the headaches that can come along with it. If you want to schedule a call, you can do so directly through my website, and there's a link in the video description below. All right, back to the build. Now I'm going to go over how I constructed these rear wall panels with bump outs. So as you saw already, I basically built the bumped out area into the wall panel itself. And really, when doing this back area in the van, there's kind of two routes you can take. The first is to build the bump out into the wall panel, as I just mentioned. And the second, the alternate option, would be to build this bumped out area into the framing of the van. Building the bump outs into the framing itself may make more sense if you're doing a build style where everything is more permanently nailed in place, and especially if you're nailing on wall cladding that's permanently nailed on. But if you have wall panels built more like this, where they're kind of easy to remove, then I think it makes more sense to build your bump out into the wall panel itself. I'm going to get this one pulled back off the wall so I can show you the construction in better detail. This whole assembly consists of three main sections. The first is the wall panel itself. The second is this frame through the middle, or you could also call that a trim ring. And then the third is the back panel. All of the wall panels in here are going to get finished out with a tweed upholstery, and so I built this whole section with that finishing process in mind. And that means I designed it so that I could take these three sections apart, upholster each section individually, and then assemble it back together and put it up on the wall. Another detail is that I didn't want it such that when it was all said and done, there would be visible screws going through the front to attach this frame or trim ring to the wall panel. So instead, what I did was I built a flange into the back here. And the flange is built into the wall panel itself, and then screws go through the flange and into the frame to secure this part to the wall panel. And then the back panel just screws on, as you saw already. Also, I intentionally built this where there's a gap here between the frame and the flange, so that once all these panels get wrapped in upholstery and they have a little extra bulk to them, it'll all still be able to fit back together. If you wanted to simplify this design a little bit, you could forego this flange design and just screw the frame into place with screws right from the front. You may have also noticed that along both the front side and the back side of this bump out, there's a curve to the piece. The curve on the front side is because the wall panel is curved, so it all needs to be cut to match. The van walls aren't flat, so we just have to build it to fit that contour. I built the curve on the back to allow me to get the bump out a little higher and a little lower than I would have if I built it all as just a square box. I built the wall panel that I've been showing over on this side first, and then I copied all of those dimensions to build the one on this side. The problem was, though, I didn't realize that the metal of the van itself stuck out a little farther down in this bottom corner on this side than that side, and so the dimensions didn't quite work out. And I had to taper this corner in to kind of get around that. If this bottom edge would have been a little higher or this side a little farther over, it would have been just enough to get around that extra bump out, but I didn't realize that till too late, and so instead I decided just to taper this corner in to work around that. Luckily on this side, everything below 36 inches will be kind of behind a cabinet or under the bed, and this part of the bump out is just going to be a small little side cubby accessible from the top, so it's not a huge deal that I had to taper that in. The takeaway I want you to get from that is just when you're on the first build step, which is to take off this panel and measure how far down and how far over and how far up you can start your bump out, that you're really careful with those measurements so that you can have your bump out avoid any of those protrusions of the metal wall behind. And with that, we're at the build steps for making these panels, so I'm going to go through that now. So after I had those measurements, I then cut out this area from the wall panel. In my last video, I covered how I cut and fit all these wall panels. Check that out if you're interested in seeing that process. Next, I needed to build the flange, which I made from 1.5-inch strips of 1/2-inch plywood. The side pieces here needed a curve cut into them to fit the curve of the wall. To figure out the curve, I clamped one of the strips onto the wall panel and then used my scribing tool to trace the shape of the wall panel into it. I cut the piece out and then tested the fit. I cut a second one for the other side and then glued this in place. I then added a straight piece to connect the strips at the top and bottom and complete the flange. Besides the glue, I added staples from the front side for extra strength. As you can see, the curve of the flange now holds the wall panel in its curved shape. Next, I cut some strips of 3/4-inch plywood to make the frame. I traced the curve for the front edge based on the shape of the wall panel. After cutting the first side, I traced the shape for the curve I wanted along the back. Once the side pieces were made, I placed them within the wall panel flange and cut and fit the top and bottom pieces of the frame to match the angles of the side panels. I joined the pieces with screws at each corner. Next, I cut the back panel and attached it with screws. This curve I built into the top was a little too steep of a curve, but more on that in a second. That was basically it for the wall panel. After test fitting it, I found I needed to retrim a few areas to make it fit a little better, but that's the basics of how it was constructed. After making some adjustments, I decided to cut curves into the top back of the back panel to help it curve. This actually didn't work the best. The board sounded like it was cracking a little when I bent it into place. For some reason, the back panel also started sinking in more after this. Instead of messing around with the curves, I decided instead just to cut this back frame to have less steep of a curve. And that then allowed me to recut this back panel without any curves and screw it on to the more gentle bend, and it was able to conform to that just fine. Part of the issue too was just the type of plywood I was trying to use on that back panel. On this one, I had started out with the 1/4-inch Baltic birch, which is a fairly thick and dense plywood with a lot of dense veneers, and it just doesn't bend very well. Over on this side, where I had to do that steeper tapered curve I talked about, I switched to a different type of plywood. This one just has 2 thin veneers sandwiched between kind of more of a lightweight core, and this one I was able to bend to fit just fine. So after all those steps, I repeated everything to make the panel on this side. I also got a new-to-me bandsaw the week I was working on all this. And I've been meaning to add a bandsaw to the shop for a while because it makes cutting curves and pieces like this a lot easier than if you're using the jigsaw. If you're starting a van build journey though and have more limited tools, just know that you can make all these cuts using just a jigsaw. The bandsaw is a nice to have, but it's not a must have. Up to this point, I've built minivans and done all my curved cutting with just a jigsaw. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.